Hi everyone, it's John. It's Tuesday, and I have my shit together for once. So, book review time. The book I want to review for you this afternoon is called Francis of Assisi: A Revolutionary Life by Adrian House, with a foreword by Karen Armstrong, the pretty popular writer, religious scholar, and former nun, by the way. So just as to be completely upfront before anyone watches this review, I myself am not a religious person. I will try to talk about this in the body of the review. That doesn't really matter to me in my opinion of the book. When I was, thinking about what might make a book about an overtly religious figure interesting to me, it's not about the truth or lack thereof of whatever they believed in, but it was sort of about how the author presents information. So that's the point of view that I'm going to be talking about the book from. If you want a devotional sort of perspective or a more reverential review, then this isn't the place to really look for that. So I'm just going to be talking about the writing. I'll sum up some of the major points of the book too, but I wanted to really talk about the book as a piece of writing instead of just sort of expressing admiration for St. Francis's way of life. It must be really hard to sort of go about writing a biography of a saint. I mean, it's hard to imagine the biographer being motivated by anything but sort of unmitigated reverence for their holy subject, in which case you sort of get more of a fawning hagiography instead of a biography. Adrian House goes out of his way to declare that this is not a book that one needs to be Catholic or even a believer in God in order to appreciate. And I needed no assurance, since even as an atheist, I had a vague idea of how fascinating St. Francis' life had been, and wanted to learn more about it, completely divorced from any supernatural or metaphysical accretions that it may have gained over the years. But however much you happen to admire St. Francis for the choices he made in life, and I happen to see him as a largely selfless human being, nothing more, nothing less, not holy in any way. Some of the stories that Adrian House relays in the book range from the overly reverential, an adjective that I've already used, and quite possibly post hoc reverential stories that members of his fellow brothership, which I'll talk about, wrote about him, emphasizing his holiness and sanctity, to the downright sort of cringe-worthy side of stories like his stigmata, which, at least in my opinion, was almost certainly self-inflicted or inflicted by that of his close friends at the time or soon thereafter of his death. One of the book's few redeeming features, this was not a book I was overly fond of, one of the book's few redeeming features is that it hashes out the social, political, economic, and religious environment of the time in such a way that it helps the reader not only in understanding St. Francis's religious contributions, but also understanding his life as just an ordinary man living in 13th century Italy. St. Francis was born in 1182 as Giovanni del Bernardone in the heart of central Italy. He was the son of a prosperous cloth and silk merchant. And after what seemed like a completely normal childhood, at age 20, Giovanni volunteered to join a military expedition against Perugia, which is the name of a rival neighboring Italian state, or was the rival of Assisi at this time, at the end of the 12th century. But Giovanni was taken prisoner for about a year, actually, before he was let go and was able to return home. 2 years after returning from home, he went to enlist in another army adventure, this time for Walter III, the Count of Brienne, and returned home because of a somewhat strange religious vision that he claims to have had. And after these two events sort of happen together within a couple of years, Giovanni begins to withdraw from some of the worldliness of the activities that he had participated in before and that he had formerly enjoyed. One day in February of 1208, upon hearing a sermon about the commissioning of the 12, as is told in the Gospel of Matthew, Francis decided to devote himself to a life of poverty and chastity. From then on, he donned a simple, coarse woolen tunic and roamed the countryside of Assisi, exhorting those he encountered to engage in love, peace, and making penance. Within a year, he had drawn almost a dozen followers, and in the next year, 1209, he wrote out a simple guidebook, very much based on New Testament teaching, which was to give instruction for those 12 followers, basically a set of rules on how to live. Eventually, he asked Pope Innocent III for permission to sort of make his own order, to formally recognize these people who were just following him around the hills of Assisi, and ask if they could have formal recognition from the Catholic Church. It was granted by Innocent III, and the order was tonsured. That is, their heads were shaven, as was the ritual at the time, and they were called the Friars Minor, which is better today known as the Franciscan Order, which is where the order gets its name. They were first centered in Umbria, but they quickly spread all over Italy. In 1211, a 17-year-old girl named Chiara Offraduccio heard Francis speak and was deeply touched by his message, so touched, in fact, that she would become one of Francis's most fervent admirers and would leave her fabulously wealthy house, her home, where she lived with her parents, and all of the furnishings and food and comforts that pretty much any person could have wanted for back then. She left it all and decided to join him in his sort of wanderings around. She did so. She also asked the Pope to commission her order of women. Of course, they couldn't be the same order as with the men, but she also got permission, and she called her sisters, her nuns, the Poor Clares, after her own name, Chiara, and the order is still called the Order of St.Clair, or more popularly, the Poor Clares. Having taken place in the 13th century, almost any meaningful relationship between an unrelated man and woman would quickly sort of be assumed to have turned into something romantic, and later cultural interpretations like Franco Zeffirelli's Brother, Sun, Sister, Moon, which came out in 1972 and was about the relationship between Claire and Francis, supposed that they had a series of complex romantic entanglements. Adrian House, as far as he's concerned at least, says that this relationship never happened, but there will always be that sort of inherent drive to speculate. Later in his life, Francis would find still another order associated with him, which is called the Third Order of Brothers and Sisters of Penance. And this order was meant for members of the laity, not for priests or wandering mendicants, but members of the laity who, for whatever reason, were not able to join a religious order, but were still drawn to Francis's rules that he laid out that underlie charity, compassion, strict poverty, etc. Like I said, I would like to think that I can divorce my own lack of belief from the rating in this book. I can honestly say that I took the time to consider its effort, to its merits and its drawbacks. It's certainly the case that not all biographies of saints should come across as inspiring or let alone inspired, but this one sort of reads more like a dutiful chronology of the major events in St. Francis's life. And as a source of pure information, I guess it really only suffers in the fact that it's somewhat flat and underwhelming in its delivery. But only that. I didn't approach it expecting an uncritical source of reverential writing about St. Francis or his spiritual greatness or anything else like that at least for me would have rendered it virtually unreadable. I can't say that I would recommend this. On Goodreads, I gave it 2 out of 5 stars, but there are thankfully many other biographies from which to draw if you're interested in St. Francis's life. I'd be interested to know what readers thought about the book itself, as always, in the comments section, above and beyond their mere regard for perhaps a fellow co-religionist. So, if you've read this book or you're interested in it or have questions or are interested in St. Francis's life, drop me a note before too long and I forget everything about it. This is Francis of Assisi, A Revolutionary Life by Adrian House. And I will see you next Tuesday. Bye, guys.